Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live stream. This is Yinuo, and today I have a very special guest, Kevin Kelly. And Kevin is joining us from California. Kevin, you want to say hi to our audience first?
Hello. I'm really privileged and looking forward to this conversation. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, wonderful. I think I'm sure probably all of you know Kevin's name. Just a brief introduction. He's the founding editor of the tech magazine Wired, and he has also put out a lot of, I would say, heavyweight books on outlook of future, like the inevitable and out of control, and those are books are translated to Chinese, and many you have many readers in China, you probably know, and also, of course, given his past accurate predictions of the future, is also known as the tech prophet. And I just when I was reading your work, I realized you're also behind the first hackathon or hackers conference back in 1984, right? When anyway, so many of the common like terms we know today was
Mhm.
either coined or made popular by Kevin. And then so that was a real privilege now to have a live conversation with him and introduce his recent work to the Chinese readers. And then the reason we have today's conversation is because this new book Kevin put out with Wu Chen, who's also a friend of mine actually, about the a future in 10,000 days, and it's called 2049. And it's a fascinating book. I had the privilege of reading this book already, and if you haven't, you can find the link of the book in a live stream room. So Kevin, maybe my first question is that what triggered this book?
Um, I think this book, for the benefit of those who haven't seen it, is describing some positive scenarios of the next 25 years. That's where the title comes from. 2049, which was 25 years ago from last year. And of course, it's also the centennial of the People's Republic. But it was trying to look forward 25 years. And it's actually a smaller project from my larger project, which is trying to look at a 100-year positive future. So, a 100-year desirable future is the big project that I'm working on. So, this 25 years is just the warm up for the bigger one of looking at a century of positive scenarios. Like, what would happen if everything worked out? What would we look like? What would we want to have? What would a future that's filled with AI and genetic engineering, what would that be? Not as a disaster and terrible, but what would it look like if it was something that it was a world that I wanted to live in? And so that's the larger project. And this is sort of like, well, to do 100 years, I should try and do 25 years. And that might be a little bit more useful for some people because it's not so far away. And the important part of it, besides the 25 years, is that they're positive scenarios. They're optimistic scenarios, and it's important to say that these are scenarios and not predictions. These are things that we would like to happen, rather than saying they're going to happen.
Hmm. Yeah. And when I was reading, even in the preface you wrote for the book, I was struck by the sense of optimism. And you also actually, for those of you who haven't, Kevin has a TED Talk a few years ago, I think in 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, I remember, about optimism. Frankly, I think that's in a way probably the opposite feeling of many people's sort of emotional states right now, because, given what's happening globally in China, and there's a higher sense of anxiety, and sometimes I would say even say depression when looking at the future, right? And then so like I think the notion of scenario, of choice, of intention, of optimism is critical. But sometimes people will say, "Hey, you're just naive." I'm sure you receive that as well. So can you share with us a bit more your take on optimism? Why is it important,
Yeah,
and is it really naive to be optimistic?
right. So let me talk about why it's important, and then let me address the question of naivete. So why it's important is that if we look around wherever you are, in the world, in the room or the office or whatever you are, and all the things in that room and the town or city outside was once a crazy passion project by somebody who believed against all odds that the world should have microphones. That was Edison. The world should have these things. And very few other people believed that that was possible at the time. And they were able to make this thing happen because they could see it and they optimistically believed that it was possible. So that means that your present today have been made by optimists of the past. And going into the future, it's unlikely that we could make anything complicated like a good AI accidentally or go to Mars accidentally or inadvertently. You actually have to have a very clear vision of what it is that you're making in order to make it possible. And you have to believe that it can be done. And that's optimism. So the future is going to be shaped by the optimists of today. And I want to be one of those people shaping the future. So if you want to be one of the people shaping the future, you need to be optimistic as you can. And optimism is not a personality, it's a choice. You can just simply choose to be more optimistic than you were yesterday. Optimism will change, but you can be more optimistic than you were. So that's why we need optimism. The question of whether it's naivete is several things. One is, in a certain sense, the optimists of today are the most realistic. Because if you look at the actual data over time, progress has been real. You can only deny that by denying the facts. But the facts is that longevity has increased, security has increased, safety has increased. All these things have increased. Options and possibilities have all increased. That is the data. And so if you are realistic, you will be paying attention to that. If you think that it's dystopian and worse, you are being naive. You're being romantic. You have a romantic idea that the past was better, but it wasn't. That is being realistic to understand that we've actually had progress. And so the problem is that people pay more attention to the news than to evidence. And the best news in the world from the best sources is going to be predominantly bad news because bad news happens fast. Good things take time. And so I can tell you if there's a headline, it's going to be about bad news because that's what happens. It happens very fast. But the good stuff takes a long time and it's often only seen in retrospect. So if you want to be optimistic, if you want to be realistic, you have to take a long view. You have to look for the long view in the past and the long view in the future, and that will help you to become an optimistic person who can shape the future.
Hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I think I was remember as I shared with you, I worked 5 years at the Gates Foundation. One of the slogan is also about optimism and looking at ordinary data instead of extraordinary data. And then because most of extraordinary things that catch our attention is bad news or disaster, blow ups. I thank you for that perspective.
Right.
So in the book, I found it very interesting because for people who haven't read the book yet, again, you can grab a copy here in the chat room, is that it has a few parts. The first part is about the five core concepts of the world in 25 years. So like the fundamentals or almost infrastructure. And then the second part and the second and third chapter is about the top 10 development areas in the next 25 years and divided into two parts into three chapters. And then the last one is imagining a more optimistic future, exactly as what Kevin said, and then with a conclusion. So it's a pretty simple book in terms of layout, and I think I like this. It's very easy to read as well. I do have a copy of it, and of course I've read and underlined many of the pages. So we'll start probably a bit from the five core concepts of the world. And the five things that Kevin and Wu Chen laid out is the mirror world, artificial aliens, UPA, aka universal personal agent, transparency and covalence, and abundance in content. So maybe we start with the first one. Like, what do you mean by the mirror world?
Yeah, the mirror world is an answer to several questions. One is like, what's after phones? And I think for me, looking at the patterns of what we've seen so far, what's after phone are magic glasses, smart glasses that you put on that allow you, they're very lightweight, easy to wear. You can wear them a long time, and they allow you to see the real world with an overlay of a virtual world, sometimes called a digital twin, because it's a intangible virtual version of the real world. You can also turn and darken the glasses and see a virtual world, like a game that doesn't exist, with the same device. So it's very, very powerful in that sense. But the main thing that it's giving you is a digital version of the real world. And the reason why that's important is that this is the same world that the AIs and robots see. When your self-driving car is going down the road, that is the world. So it's a way to kind of like meet. It's the place that we can meet AI and robots in a certain sense. But more importantly, it's also a way because these glasses do two things. One is they show you the virtual world, and you can see avatar. So we could be speaking right now. You would be sitting in my living room or my office, and I would be in your den or studio, and we would have a three-dimensional avatar, and it would feel like you're there. That's the thing that this does is it gives you a feeling, even though you may not be exactly the same and I would know it. It didn't matter. It would feel like you're there in the same way that we feel motion in a movie, which isn't present. There's no motion. It's just a series of still images, but we feel like motion. So here we feel like presence. And that presence is very, very powerful and very, very convincing and very, very instrumental in social contact. So we have a very much more social media than we even have right now, which is this mirror world. Um, and that's the display. But the important thing it's also doing is that it's mapping the world. It's seeing the world in three dimensions in real time, and it's digesting it. So it's using AI to and not just perceiving the world, it's also perceiving me in the world. So, in order to convey my avatar to you, it has to see my face and my emotions and my gestures. And so, it's conveying that to you. And so, it's basically parsing the entire real world with AI and seeing what's new and seeing movements, and that is being parsed. And so, it's like AI is looking at the world in real time, the whole world. So that's where the power comes from.
Mm.
It's not just that we're seeing a virtual digital world, it's the fact that we're mapping again and again and again, seeing it and using all that information to create new services and products that we can't even imagine right now. So
Mm.
it's a new platform in a way that's after just having this magic stone in our pocket, the iPhone or the phone. It's three-dimensional, volumetric. It's what we called spatial intelligence is the new term. It meaning the system understands how to render three-dimensional stuff, how to generate the physics. So it's like a simulation of the world that's also running real time in the world. So it's very, very powerful. There's lots of things that are coming out of that. And I have to say that this is not going to happen in 5 years. This is even after 25 years, this is still being in progress. But it will have begun in
Mhm.
in 25 years.
Yeah. So it's a I think a question our readers might have is that that sounds really fun. And also, of course, as we all know, this world is, you have so much access. You can be at places you couldn't travel to, and you could even, travel in time. You can talk to Thomas Edison maybe, right? And because, AI would have all the
Yep.
information to make this digital presence very
Right.
authentic and real. Yeah. But then, and people would say, well, in that world, and who will take an interest in the real world then?
Well, I think it increases our ability to look at the real world because that's what it's mapping. That's what you're embedded in.
Mm.
It amplifies the real world. It enhances the real world. I mean, you see through you see the real world. And so it's like, the trivial classic example is you see somebody, you're you they're really there, but they're annotated. Maybe they have their name, so you can remember their name. It tells you their name is floating above it, so so you've been reminded of their name. So it's like you're going to meet them face to face, but now you have an enhanced meeting because they have a name tag on that follows them around, and so it's a better version of really meeting them because you remember their name, or you can have other things that you last talked about, whatever it is. So it's not a way of substituting for the real world. It's an overlay that's enhancing and augmenting, and what they call augmented reality. You're augmenting the reality rather than substituting for it.
Yeah, yeah. I think in the book you mentioned this very intriguing concept is that AI will make what's currently only available to the wealthy, available to the commoners. Like, travel to exotic places. In a way
Yeah.
with AI, that's possible with anyone. And also, you mentioned, I think the third concept is the universal personal agent, right? The UPA, which is basically, now if you work at, as a CEO of a company, you have very capable executive
Right.
assistant,
Right.
maybe multiple,
Right.
but commoners can't afford it. And you're imagining a world that, in that world, everybody can afford a very capable agent. Yeah, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the what's the word I want? The little lesson that you started with, which was true, which was I often try to look for the lifestyle of the extremely wealthy as a hint of where
Mhm.
we're going to, and that's been true for a very long time. It's not my insight actually. It was in the old days, 100 years ago. They talked about the only the rich could afford ice during the summer. And that was a luxury at one time, was keeping things cool during the summer. Of course, now everybody has a refrigerator, and so that was the typical thing. And when I was growing up, it was called only the rich ever left the country on vacation. That was literally in my lifetime. People talked about jet setting to Europe, going to Europe for vacation, which was considered incredibly extravagant. And now, of course, middle class people do it all the time. And so, cell phones were things that the rich CEOs or the billionaires of the world would have. Nobody else. And um, so that's a good pattern. And so, right now, as you mentioned, one of the perks of being incredibly wealthy is you have these personal assistants who will research anything, do anything, get anything done. They're agents, and they're at your command day and night. And that is very close to for us. And I don't think necessarily that it'll be free, but it'll be affordable, and they will get better over time. And so the question will be not that whether you have them, but what happens next? What would you do with them? What would how would you employ them? Because that's not an obvious thing, particularly if you could have more than one. Um, I mean, there's only so much you can do in your own travel schedules and stuff. But the question is like, well, what do you do next? And I think it's a little harder to see what people would start to use their personal agent for. What we are expecting is that your agent will interact with other people's agents, and um, at first, I think this is like what I call the third wave in AI. This is not in the book, but the first wave is um, measuring how much AI you have by how many people in the world have adopted it. So if you look at the charts with OpenAI and all these people talk about is the number of people, of humans who have accounts. And that's kind of looking how it is. And so right now there's like 2.6 billion accounts with AI. And so obviously the first step is like you want to go to 8 billion. So everybody has it. So you're measuring kind of like humans. But that second wave is like, forget about humans. It's like you want always on AI. You want the AI to be always on all the time. You want your agents working all the time. And so it's going to be like the number of hours that the number of hours of attention that the AIs are providing. Because in theory, you would like your AI working for you while you're sleeping and doing stuff. So you want how many hours in total? But that's just the second phase, because the third phase is who cares about the number of hours? Is you want the AIs talking to other AIs, way beyond the number of human hours, 24 hours. You want billions or trillions of these agents talking to others, doing work while we do other stuff. And that right now it's very hard to imagine kind of what that economy or ecosystem of agents talking to other agents and the whole complex, what that looks like. That's sort of the frontier. I
Hmm.
don't think we're there in 10 years or 15 years, but maybe again in 25 years we might begin to have some kind of an economy of agents talking to other agents. And I think that's a frontier in terms of what we would actually use that for. But that's the direction that we seem to be going.
Hmm. In your book, you did mention this concept of B2B, bot to bot.
Right.
Is that something
It's the
similar
same
to?
thing. Agent to
Mhm.
agent, bot to bot,
Yeah.
A to A, bot to bot. It's we don't have good terms for it, but that's all the same idea. And
Yeah.
it's we'll begin pretty quickly. I mean, I know, if I get an agent, I'll have it deal with spam immediately. So it's like we want that. But there'll be a lot of spam. It'll be A to A spam. A lot of your agent will be taking up dealing with the spam made by other agents. And so
Right.
uh, you know, maybe there'll be some larger cures for that. I'm not really sure. But the point is that we don't really have a very good idea of exactly what that power would be used for when you have millions.
Hmm.
People could have millions of agents working for them doing what? And I think, and this is part of that our human attention, the limited amount of attention, I'm limited in how much attention I can give. That becomes incredibly more and more valuable.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
and going back then to the wealthy, I think one of the things we're seeing with the wealthy is that they surround themselves with humans,
Hmm.
and I think that's going to be another thing is that human presence, direct face-to-face human presence, will become ever more valuable, and we will
Hmm.
pay a lot of money to have that face-to-face encounter.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, it's fascinating. I think when I was reading this part, I guess again when our readers you read this as well, sometimes you have a sense, oh, you almost make humans dispensable, like because the AI, the bots can do so much, they don't have to sleep, right? They have unlimited
Yeah.
energy, and then they see in the world much more than any common person. And then I think maybe when our readers listening to this will have the same question, like then will they take over us? Like will we still be useful? Like, the
Yeah,
bots
yeah,
that have
yeah.
the world of their own.
Yeah, well, we had this. They had similar worries at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution because the motor can run day and night. There are some motors in my house that are running all the time, heat pumps and stuff. And that used to be something that humans had to do. It used to be the only way you got any work done with muscles, either animal muscles or human muscles. There's no other way, which is very limiting. That kind of muscle needs to rest, it needs to sleep. And now we have motors running day and night all the time. It's like, well, does that make humans less valuable? No, it doesn't. It just shifts where we can spend our time and attention. And I think what we shift away from with AI is um, doing many of the things that we don't want to do, but more importantly, it enables us to do many of the things that we would like to do and didn't know we could even do. And I think a lot of those things that we're spending our time on have several qualities about them. One is that they're not efficient. As I say, efficiency is for robots and AIs. They do efficiency. And they also ideally be something, the things that we do, which might be closer and harder for us to even identify as work. I don't know much about you, but I'm going to guess that your grandfather would have been completely perplexed by your job, your many jobs. They would just not compute. It would not make any sense that you're being paid to do what you're doing. It would be so hard to imagine that. And you could have told him that, most of the people doing what he was doing would not be doing it anymore. And that would make no sense at all. And so it's going to be very hard for us to kind of imagine what these jobs are that we do,
Mhm.
how we get paid for them. But it's very clear that that's the direction that we're going. And
Mhm.
and so science is not efficient. Art is not efficient. Um, Many discovery is not efficient. Innovation is not efficient because you have to make mistakes. You
Mhm.
have to try stuff that don't work. And if you're not doing things that don't work, you're not going to be learning anything. You're not innovating. So all those things are inherently inefficient. And so far, um, humans are really good at the inefficient stuff. And so that's where we're going to land up. We're going to use the AI tools to help us, as we do right now with writing. They're incredibly useful, but still, as long as we are talking to other humans, we have an advantage because
Yeah.
those AIs are aliens. They're like Spock. They can think, they may even eventually be conscious and sentient, but they are different. They just they have a different sense of humor. They have a different way of thinking. They may come up with an answer, but they could get there in a different way. And so these aliens are incredibly useful with us. They're our partners, but they're not us. They didn't grow up like us. We are just so humanly more comfortable with people with our background that we will pay for that pleasure, for that perk,
Mhm.
hanging around with people who are just like us.
Yeah, it was interesting because I think that's another concept like Kevin mentioned is the instead of AI is it's aliens, it's AA, it's artificial
Artificial aliens.
aliens.
Right.
Yeah, but they're yeah, I guess but maybe many people's fear is that yeah, motors, machines, those are fine. I mean, those they don't have like higher level intelligence, right? So at least one of the um, you know, people topic people talk about is how intelligent those aliens could be. And if they are more intelligent than us one day, which, like motors can never be, then what? would that be the world be dangerous to us? I guess that's the, fear many people think of when they
Yeah,
look
yeah.
at it.
Well, I think that's a complete misunderstanding of what intelligence is. First of all, intelligence is not like decibels. Like, it's not a single dimension where it's here and it's more superior or better. There is no such thing as that. There is no there. It's multidimensional, and secondly, it's even not the most important thing. Um, it's animals are more intelligent in certain dimensions than us right now. If you took Einstein and a tiger and put them in a cage, who's going to live? It's not the most intelligent one. Intelligence is way overrated in terms of getting things done in the world.
Hmm.
A lot of people have noticed that some of the most effective CEOs are not necessarily the most intelligent, not necessarily the smartest. It's um, we have over-indexed and overrated the role of IQ, which doesn't isn't really real, and IQ measurement is not really a good measurement of what's going on. And part of what we're doing with AI is we're going to make a whole bunch of distinctions about the different kinds of cognition, and to understand that intelligence is not like an element; it's like a compound.
Mm.
Thousands, even a couple hundred years ago, people thought water was an element. It's not an element. It's not essential. It's a compound made up of the elements. And we probably have a number of elemental cognitions in which our kind of brain is a compound. And we'll make many different kinds of compounds. And you can say which compound is superior. Well, it depends on what it is that you want done.
Yeah.
And so we're going to have complicated compounds of AIs, plural, doing different things, and some will be superior to others in certain things that they were doing. And this idea that there's one universal monster AI is the myth. That is the romantic Hollywood version of things that has very little basis in fact.
Hmm.
And so when we talk about AIs, we should talk about AIs in plural. We should understand that what we think of as intelligence is compound, and many species of it actually exist. And so, yes, we might make some very powerful AIs, but they can't be, you can't optimize everything. That's the engineer's truth. You can have speed, accuracy, cost. Pick two of the three, whatever it is. You cannot optimize everything. And that's true with brains. That's true with minds.
Yeah. Thank you. That's very powerful. It reminds me of I read your 68 bits of advice.
Yeah,
And I remember vividly one of them is enthusiasm is worth 25 IQ points or something.
right.
That's a great point. I think and thank you for that clarification, because I think we over-index on IQ or intelligence, but forgot, like, human being has a much wider and complete sense of wisdom. And that
Yeah.
is what machines cannot replace. But also that's what allow us to use them as
Right.
tools.
Well, I mean, besides wisdom, there's also grit,
Hmm.
perseverance, clarity of communication. There are so many other things that are needed to get something done in the world.
Hmm.
I call this idea thinkism. Thinkism is a
Mm.
fallacy that thinking alone will solve problems.
Mm.
That more intelligence is all you need. And it's just absolutely not true. To get things done in the world requires more than thinking about them. And in fact, part of the problem right now is that there's lots of very complicated things. And we know this from complexity studies that can that you cannot predict. You actually have to run the system out to see what happens. And we're at the point right now where we have lots of things like AI and other stuff that we can think about, and it's just not any more useful. We actually have to use them in daily life for many years to actually figure out what they're good for and what their harms are. So we're at the point where basically we've been thinking about AI for 100 years, and thinking is not going to get us any further. We actually have to now use it, and it's the people who are using it rather than thinking about it who are going to be able to steer it and understand it. So,
Hmm.
that's why I preach this kind of not precautionary principle, but proactionary principle, because precautionary principle is thinking about. They're saying, well, we can imagine some bad things happening. They're thinking about it. This is based on imagination. And that we're trying to make policy based on what you can imagine. No, no, no. We want to make policy based on the actual evidence of use. What actually happens. How many people have actually been fired because of AI? Let's look at that. And almost very, very few people. That is where we start. Not that we could imagine a friend of a friend being fired, or we could imagine mass unemployment. That's thinkism.
Hmm.
That's not
Yeah.
evidence.
Thank you. I think I like that word, which is something we should criticize. I think
Right.
is yeah. And back to the five core concepts. One thing really struck me is this one about transparency and
Right.
covalence. You call it covalence because
Hmm.
people usually heard the word, surveillance, somebody looking at us, right? And of course, one of the big concern, commoners have is also, oh,
Right.
now I'm connected to the AI world, all my data, not only data, like maybe my emotion, my personal
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
life
yeah, yeah.
is into the public space. And then I think that when you mention this covalence idea, that's very enlightening. Can you, share with the audience a bit more what that means?
Yeah. So um, there's a tension in trying to make the best service and products for us, because most of us, me included, would like to be treated as an individual. It's like we're going down the street and there's nobody there, and we're in a car and we're driving a little bit faster than the speed limit, and it's like we're in a hurry. You have to pick up the kids at school, whatever. You're late, and so there are some circumstances, and we would like to be, if we were stopped by the police, we'd like to be treated as an individual, saying, I normally don't do this. It's a special thing, whatever it is. And so there's rather than just sort of like say, okay, you're a number, you're above this. It doesn't matter who you are or what it is. You're just generic number. And so same thing with customers. If we go in to buy something, we're common every day. We like to be treated. Someone remembers who we are. We're an individual. We have certain preferences. We're not just a number. And so we want personalization in all things. We want our friends to treat us personally, remember who we are and who we are. And we want other people, we want even governments to treat us personally. We don't want to be a random number. To do that, to have the ultimate personalization requires transparency. We have to reveal ourselves. Now, we could say, well, I am so against revealing myself, I will accept being treated like a number. And I think we should have that choice of the dial of where we want to. But we have to be very clear that there's a trade-off, that there's a cost. That perfect personalization requires perfect transparency. Perfect privacy requires perfect generic treatment. So if you want to be not known, then you're going to be treated just like a number, and no one will treat you individually. And for some people, that's a choice. And so I think we should have this choice. But here's the thing, and this is the point of it. When people are given that choice, 99% of them push to the maximum personalization. They'll say, I'm willing to have myself be transparent in exchange for maximum personalization. And that's going to be very true about this mirror world that we're talking about, because in order to project your avatar to somebody else, your stuff is going to be captured. You're going to have to be monitored. You're going to have to be tracked. You're going to have to be transparent. If you want your emotions to be shown to someone else, they have to be captured. Some system has to capture that and transmit it. And so um, most people so far seem to be interested in pushing that slider all the way to the maximum personalization, which requires maximum transparency. However, that transparency, and this is the point of covalence, has to go two ways. So if it's just them looking at me, surveilling me, and I get no benefits, and they're not accountable, and they can't be corrected, and uh, there's nothing I can do about it, then that's very, very uncomfortable. That's People reject that, and I would reject that. So, in order for making that tracing comfortable for us, we kind of require some things, and the main thing that we require is that we get benefits rather than that they get benefits only. So the benefits should almost be lopsided towards us. So we're getting benefit. We can correct. It's accountable in some way to us. We can have choice about removing it. There's a bunch of rights and powers that we need to retain. And that's what I call covalence in the sense that we should be able to see them just as they see us. It should be a two-way street. And that's the co in the covalence rather than a one-way street. So that relationship needs to be two ways.
Yeah.
And if it isn't, then it's not comfortable, and I don't think people are going to be very happy with that, and they probably aren't going to surrender for the personalization.
Yeah. I think that's the one-way relationship is exactly what's going on most of the time now, which
Right.
is surveillance, right? So like you got seen by whoever, you don't even know who they are. Some might be tech, some might be government.
Well,
And
but no, it's like for instance, like Netflix is watching what I watch, but they're giving me great benefits for that. That recommendation really, really works. I get benefit. I know who they are. I do have access to that list. There are ways on Netflix you can say, show me my file, so to speak. If they don't seem to be, they seem to be pretty clear about what they do with the information. They aren't selling it to others. So we do have examples
mm,
where there's a kind of covalence.
yeah. But by covalence, when you say I as individual can see them, what you're implying is that I can see what they're collecting of me, right?
Well, yes. And what happens with the information and whether it's correctable, whether it's accountable, whether I have power over it, whether I can, all those kinds of things.
Hmm.
Now, can I see into, I'm not watching Netflix employees walk around. That would be interesting. But uh, uh, the relationship has to be two ways.
Hmm. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, again, for the first chapter of the book, that's where Kelly mentioned the five core concepts, the mirror world, artificial aliens,
Yeah.
the universal personal agent, transparency and covalence, and abundance in content. Again, you can read them in detail in the book. With time, I want to move on to the 10 areas, which is very exciting. Of course, we don't have time to cover all of them. But one of the things that really caught me is when you talk about the second one, which is digital governance,
Right.
and which is kind of related to what we talked about on covalence as well. Yeah, can you explain a bit more, like what do you mean by digital governance and what need to happen for this better scenario to be realistic?
Yeah. At the elementary level, we're seeing this happen right now. Is you want most of the transaction with the government to be digitized, of course, and electronic, um, which is actually happening pretty fast in China compared to many other countries, including the U.S., which has been very slow in that. So that's just kind of an elementary, crude version of it. But more importantly, I think I think it's what I call you want evidence-based policy. You want to make policy decisions, regulation based on evidence rather than ideologue, which is what's happening in America right now, where you have people who have a dogma, a belief, a principle, and that will form what they believe the regulation should be. And the alternative is that you base regulation on kind of how people behave and what, it's like the old trick in building a campus. Um, the the architects of building like a college campus, what they would do is they would put in the sidewalks in the routes of what the students had made by walking across the lawn and making their own path. It's like that's where we want the sidewalk, is where people are going to naturally walk. No put in sidewalks first and then everybody shortcuts. No, you try to encode the behavior and and the consensus, and that becomes the evidence for determining where the sidewalks go. And it's a similar kind of a thing where you're using the evidence to codify laws and regulation. And if things change, they change based on evidence. And so that requires an incredible amount of data gathering and processing and intelligence. And uh, so that's another use of this mirror world that we're going to be going into, which is that it is inherently going to be capturing huge, huge amounts of human behavior. And that provides a platform for making a social society based that's regulated based on the evidence of how people actually behave.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. I think in a way, uh, yeah, let's talk about America because it's a safer country to criticize. And then when we talk about
Right,
dogma and ideology, and that seem to override
right,
data, right? And
right,
then I think logically people would, I think this is almost the other side of human being, right? On the one hand, you talk about thinkism, which is okay, use too much
right,
intelligence
right,
and
right,
data and all that. On the other hand, sometimes we arbitrarily override that
right,
with beliefs and tribalism.
right.
Yeah, so I wonder how, you know, how do you think we can overcome it? And how would AI's development not aid to the dark side, but aid the bright side? I think that's probably deep in many people's mind as well.
Right. Well, this was an example is you would use the AI to do the data processing to discern the patterns and making decisions about kind of what AI is very good is kind of settling a very, very complicated high dimensional system, lots of variables, and kind of coming up with a solution to that. And so we have lots of competing things, and then you could extract out a compromise of some sort that says here's the optimal policy based on all these competing things. And if you don't like that, we'll just change your priorities. And so we certainly could have AI assisted all kinds of policy things, including the justice system. It's very complicated, lots of court things, and AI can be incredibly fair. That's if it's programmed that way, and that's the one of the hopes is that you have AI assisted judiciary that's suggesting things that humans would approve or not, but it could balance all kinds of things that humans find taxing. I mean, we could do it, but we're have so many days, so many hours, limited number of hours, we can actually expand that. And so I think there's lots of ways. It's a very positive way to do it. And again, one of the advantages of having AIs is that they can be very impartial. And again, if you want impartial, they can do impartial. They can do emotional free. Now, some people say, well, That's a negative because we want humans to be emotional and stuff. Well, you don't really I mean, do you want human intervention and emotionalism in justice? Probably not. And so, because you want it fair, you want them to be impartial. And so, AI can help us in that way. So, can we think of ways in which it goes wrong? Absolutely. I don't spend much time that in this book because other people are doing that. If you want some horror stories about how all this could go wrong, you can find at least 20 other books telling you that. So I don't need to address that. I'm trying to say, well, how could it possibly go right?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I think out of the 10, the digital governance is the second one, as I mentioned. And then you move on. I think there are two topics I want to really dive deep with you. And I think there's concern many of our readers as well. One is on organization or workplace change, and the other is education. So maybe the first on organization change, I think it's fascinating you talk about this idea that first of all, it's not going to cause massive loss of jobs, which is, kind of
Yep,
being
yep.
the mainstream voice. And also you talk about how the organization will almost diverge into extremes, right? So there's the super big ones who can employ millions of people, and also like individual companies. And I love especially the point you mentioned around the elimination of the middle management.
Right.
Yeah, and then it all made sense after you read it. But I guess when I just first mentioned this to our readers, the first time you hear it, it was, oh, that's kind of odd. How is that possible? And but again, try to get a copy of the book. 大家可以在直播间看到这个书的链接啊，其中有讲到很具体的。So back to Kevin, do you mind telling us a little bit like how do you get to this conclusion or not conclusion scenario? Like then how the organizations could evolve in 25 years?
Yeah, it's a little bit like what's happened with the internet, which is that it actually enabled both larger companies to become larger and individual companies to become smaller. You had more power. And AI kind of enhances and extends that. So with AI, um, you and your AI assistants, if you have thousands of them, you can do the work of what maybe in the past would take a company to do, and now you can do it individually. So there's new opportunities there. But at the same time, I think we're going to also develop new tools that will allow the biggest collaborations to become even bigger. And um, even though we have some very large companies in the world, what's interesting about them is that they're not really collaborating on a single project in real time. They have many projects, and it's often offset, um, and they're not really capable of actually working together in real time. But we could invent, and I think AI could help invent new tools that would allow that kind of collaboration with a million people on a single project. And part of what you need to do, there's a couple things that we don't have. One is in a million people, for every new task that comes up, the problem is finding that right person to do it. That matchmaking function is very, very difficult. So even in large organizations today, they have something they want done, and they know that somewhere in the organization is this perfect person, but they don't know how to find that person. That person's not aware that you need this thing here. And so that function of matchmaking is very, very needed, and AI could, in theory, help make that happen because it's monitoring and realizes, oh my gosh, you need this person. This person's over here. They don't know about, and we'll bring them over, and they'll be able to do this in 5 minutes. The second thing is that uh, just being able to collaborate in real time and get credit too. That's the other thing is that in order to incentivize people at this really large scale, you want to be able to track the credit of who did what. And that's again something that AI is so you could have these very large projects where people are getting very, very particular and they feel good about it because they're getting credit for what is done. And that is also tracking with the AIs. So I think these are some of the ways that you could have a very, very large, large projects that we couldn't even do right now. So that's at the larger end, and then there's a smaller end. And in the middle, what we're finding is that, and this is based on the current usage of AI, people who are using AI so far in, let's say, the past 5 years, what they're finding out is that AI enables lots of kind of the boundaries between departments to blur. People are capable of doing more cross department work. And the people in the middle who are in the past kind of instrumental in coordinating aren't as needed. And a lot of the executive functions that middle managers did can be done by the AIs, and so they're not as needed. The workers themselves are kind of augmented, but it's that managing the executive function stuff that actually the AIs are pretty good at. And so the highest level strategy long term is still needed, and they're not very good at long term thinking. So what that means is you have an increased value of the actual people doing work, and then you have increased value of the strategy, but the middle part is less valuable.
Mm.
So one of the things we know so far from the adoption of AI, again in the past 5 years, actually how it's used is that it's what we call a jagged frontier, meaning it's uneven.
Hmm.
Salesforce just Mark Benioff, the CEO, just talked about how they have put a pause on hiring engineers, but they have increased and doubled up the hiring of salespeople because their
Mm.
business is so good. So AI has sort of like, we don't need as many, we're not going to hire any, we're not going to fire anybody, but we're not going to hire that many engineers, but we're going to hire a lot more sales. So it's an uneven kind of a frontier. And so that's, there'll be uh, more what we find out, even the occupations that we thought were going to be first impacted, like radiology, people were saying you don't need to have a human radiologist. They're going to, they're going to be fired or whatever, or human translators or help desk. And what we find, in fact, that the numbers have not gone down. They haven't really gone up, but they haven't gone down. And it's because jobs are bundles of tasks, and those tasks change, but the job remains. So what the AI has done is augmented and replaced some of the tasks, but gave more executive functions to the workers. They've becoming kind of middle managers themselves in the sense that
Hmm.
they're now managing AI agents.
Hmm.
So the bottom level workforce is doing more executive managerial type functions, which is why
Hmm.
you don't need the ones in the middle as much.
Hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating because I remember my years of doing management consulting. Many of the issues are due to lack of transparency in a large organization. Because a senior management has maximum number of direct reports, right? So
Right.
like there was a pizza roll or two pizza roll means like up to 9 people is the sort of the golden standard. Like you can't have more than that in terms of your direct reports. You can't manage it. But basically, you're saying in this book, there's a scenario where that's not necessarily true anymore
Right.
because transparency is massively improved, and many decisions can be done with
Right.
the intelligence provided by AI, and that's I think that will bring fundamental change to
Hmm.
um, yeah, to how people think about business and also how B schools would function, right? Because B schools, frankly, are oftentimes teaching people how to navigate a complex org or a bureaucracy.
Right.
And then also the concept of leadership. So the leadership also kind of almost saying two, almost like two ends as well. Because you did mention in the book that 企业家 or entrepreneurs or business owners or senior executives won't be replaced because they need to make strategic decisions with a lot of uncertainty. But on the other hand, like the on the ground
Right,
staff
right,
would be more reactive,
right, right.
yeah, to the real. So like, you didn't really specifically talk about, but I'm curious. So what do you think the future would require of the leaders, like as we call
Yeah,
it?
yeah. So I see the structure of organizations as falling out by what we call the pace layers, the Stuart Brand's pace layers.
Yeah.
Um, it's sort of like it depends on the time horizon, your time horizon. So at the very bottom are people who are concerned about what has to happen in the next 5 minutes. Like there's orders are coming in. Somebody has to make sure that they respond. It's a very, very fast cycle. It's like minute by minute or second by second. That's their concern. It's the things that are the IT department. It's like this is like real time. And so that's for a lot of the lower employees. The middle managers can take a little bit a longer time if they're concerned about, well, next month what will happen, or next quarter. But the leaders have to think on a time horizon of years, if not decades. They're thinking, well, we need electricity, so we need a power plant. That's going to take 3 years to build. We need permits now. They're taking a much, much longer time horizon. And so that's where the hierarchy comes from. It's time paced, divided. And right now, the AIs have tremendous difficulty with long, consistent time horizons. They're just not capable of doing it. Will they be able to sometime? We'll see. But right now, they're not capable of doing it. So the humans aren't going to be displaced there for the foreseeable future. I would say within certainly the 25-year horizon that we're talking about, because they're just not capable of keeping that kind of continuity over a really long term. I mean, as you know, with the AIs, they don't even have any memory right now. Those LLMs have no memory. I don't know if people understand that. When you're talking to them and have a conversation, what they're doing, what the systems are doing, is they reload back into the LLM the your last responses. It's because they don't have any memory whatsoever. So um, so they're better suited for the bottom short term stuff, which they're really, really good at. They're not as at all suited for the strategic, long term leader kind of function.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, and then can you explain a bit more? And people would say, then wouldn't the short-term 5-minute frontline workers be easier to be let go instead of the middle management? Why would they stay, but the middle management will go?
Right. Because if they're doing something that's been done 1,000 million times, yes, they're they're not needed there. But if you're doing something for the very first time, there is no horizon. That's an infinitely long thing for the first
Hmm.
time. So the humans are going to be moved to the frontier where you're
Mm.
trying something for the first time, where efficiency doesn't count, where you have to make mistakes, where you have to try things.
Mm.
So if it's efficiency at the lower end, no humans are going to be doing that at all,
Hmm.
and we
Yeah.
don't want them to.
Yeah.
I don't want them to. And so they're moved to the frontier where they're trying something for the first time where it's not efficient. You don't know what the answer is. And humans are much happier there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's where Kevin also mentioned later in the book around robotics, automation, factory, dark factory. So like the efficiency part is being replaced. So when we talk about the companies with millions of people, the millions of people will not be doing the same thing as the assembling line
Right,
workers, right? So they're actually on the front line meeting
right,
with customers, or as you said, if there's a business
right,
talking to people, they will be the ones talking to your customers.
right.
Um,
So what?
and
Yeah, and like the dark factories, what we're finding in dark factory because they have no lights is the robot repair people.
mm,
That's huge numbers of instead of working on the assembly lines, they work to repairing the robots, because that is not it's not a mechanical automatic thing. It
Hmm.
requires a lot of problem solving. Maybe someday the robots will be able to repair each other, but not right now, not in the next 25 years. And then
Yeah.
the other thing is sort of in making the new robots. That's another new job. And so yes, I think again, when humans are hired, there's hired kind of like for three things, at least three things. When a human is hired, when you have an employee,
Hmm.
the number one thing, of course, is you want someone capable of doing the job. But there's two other things that you're getting. The second thing that you're hiring a human for is taking responsibility for the job.
Hmm.
It's like, okay, if a job isn't done, you have to do it. You have to stay later, get someone else, whatever it is. I'm counting on you to be responsible, and I'm trusting you to get the job done. AIs do not have that. If they give you a wrong answer, who cares? They don't care. They're not
Yeah.
taking responsibility for it.
Hmm.
Humans who are working with AIs, they're going to absorb the responsibility for it because you want them to absorb the responsibility for all these agents. They've got a million agents. Who's responsible? There's one human. And the
Yeah.
second thing that humans do, which is very, very important,
Mhm.
they learn on the job and they learn what needs to be done. And AIs are completely incapable. They don't learn right now. This is one of the shocking things about them. Is they've they've had four learnings. Chat GPT 4. It's
Hmm.
only been trained. It's only learned four times. Okay, it's waiting for the fifth time to learn. And because they're not trained, they're trained every couple of years. And
Hmm.
so humans are learning daily. And that's very, 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 very powerful.
Hmm.
You're learning what needs to be done. You're learning on the job. The AIs are not learning on the job right now.
Hmm.
And so those additional things are what you are getting when you purchase or hire a human. You're not just getting the things done, but you get someone to take responsibility for the work and they're who are learning the work.
Yeah.
Big. That's big stuff.
Right. Yeah. Okay, I think the last piece I want to get into is education because this is the most fascinating chapter of the book. Of course, I'm biased given what we do. And I'll quote you from your book. You actually did say that too. You said, if there is an industry that is most severely affected by the development of AI, it's none other than the education industry. And you said that in the next 25 years, education reform will be highly correlated with the development of AI. And again, do get a copy of the book because we, in the limited time we have, we won't have Kevin talk about everything, but all his thoughts is in the book. But I want to kind of touch the highlights because you did mention, I think both kind of how it will impact sort of the primary segment of education, and also fascinating aspect on the higher education, how universities will be different. I think those are all very relevant. I think lots of our readers or listeners now are parents and people constantly think about it. Do you want to share with our view, like how the biggest change that AI will bring to education?
Um, uh, Again, I think there's quite a substantial difference between elementary school education and say like college and postdoc and beyond. They're really very different things.
Yeah.
Elementary school, a lot of the education is for me is character building. I don't really even care about knowledge.
Hmm.
It's character habits that are far more important. Um, but one of the things one of the first promises of AI, one of the first things that it can really change is to um, have have learning happen at the pace of individual students. Um, that's sort of the most unfortunate state of education right now is that the education happens at the speed of the average student and often at the slowest student. And there's just no reason for that with an AI assisted education. Students should be able to learn at their own preferred pace. And that's really hard to do without AI. It's one of the first things that happens with AI. And the second thing that happens with AI um, is that teachers are enabled as much as students.
Yeah.
A lot of the most biggest fans of AI so far actually not been students but teachers because it can save them hours a day as they grade and write up reports and make lesson plans and stuff that are aimed to individuals. So those two things are the first things that are the I think the most important. Um, the kind of personalization and then the enabling of teachers. Um, but there are other things too that I think can be taught with AI that are hard to do. And for me, the central skill needed is not knowledge because if you want an answer to the question, you're going to ask a machine, you're going to ask AI. Um, it's this idea of the when you graduate, you want a couple of skills. One is you want the skill of being able to ask questions instead of answering questions. That is really, really important. AI can answer questions, but they're not as good as at asking questions, and that's a job for a student. But the second more important thing is I think you want to graduate somewhere along the line with knowing how you can optimize your own learning. You want to have learned how to learn because that's all you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. You're going to be learning new things, new skills, new whatever it is. And whatever you graduate with thinking you're going to do in 2 years, there's going to be something new that didn't exist when you were studying. And so, this idea of being lifelong learning and optimizing your own personal learning is not done anywhere. I have found no school anywhere with a curriculum on optimizing an individual's learning so that they graduate knowing how they best work. You have athletes graduate knowing how they can perform the best. They've
Yeah.
optimized their own training. We don't have that in learning. And that is something that AI could be very good at. And you still need, you can't do this yourself. You need people around you. You need teachers and guides and training and discipline and testing to be able to figure this out. And that's what I think schools can become is a way to help you arrive at understanding and perfecting your own way of learning in all the different modes.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Because I think one of the problems in education is almost a version of what you said the thinkism is
Right,
in education, right? So basically, people think that's an accumulation of knowledge and getting tested,
right,
and if you and then many times it's a memorization game,
right,
and then you memorize, you accumulate certain knowledge, you pass the test, and you
right,
have
right,
this illusion that somehow you have learned.
right, right,
Yeah, but in essence, first of all, as you said, because we run education in school, and
right,
then
right, right.
large part of it, especially when they're younger, um, you say character building. Indeed, we call it social emotional learning. Like things, how
Uh-huh.
do you handle conflicts?
Right, right.
You get into a fight. How do you kind of get yourself out of it?
Sure.
And how do you see different opinion? And those things, I call it sort of the invisible curriculum. Because people go to a school, they see the visible curriculum, they see the math, like English or Chinese or whatever. So like then that's easy to recognize and appreciate. And people look at scores to evaluate. But this invisible part is often dismissed.
Right.
But reading your book just make me realize that in the age of AI, this invisible part is becoming the dominant part because
Exactly. Exactly.
right.
Yep, 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 yep.
Yeah, yeah,
You're,
because the
you're,
visible part is so easy to be replaced. And then also on the visible part, as you said, it's not like learning is not important. Learning is critically important, but what you learn at school is only a starting point. You have to keep learning. I can imagine for you, you have updated your database, I don't know, millions of times
right, right,
by
right,
the
right,
time you reach your
right, right.
70s.
Right.
Yeah, but like we have very little like attention on the science of learning, like and also
Exactly. Right. Right.
how individuals exactly like to your as to your point, like if an athlete you would know how do I best train, like what kind of
Right. Right.
athlete
Right. Right.
I'm a long jumper or I'm a sprint
Right.
runner,
You know
train
how many reps and how much
right,
rest between reps. Well, the same thing in memorizing something. You want to know what do you do best? How many reps? How much rest? How much sleep do you need?
right,
And the again, learning is not just about thinkism. It's not just about thinking. It's like grit. It's determination. It's practice. All those elements are part of what makes a good learner. Asking questions, being curious. These are things that, again, enthusiasm.
enthusiasm, yeah, empathy,
And so,
right,
how do you increase enthusiasm? How do
yeah,
you increase optimism? Those are all part of increasing your ability to learn.
mm-hmm,
And so it's a very wide and humanistic job.
yeah,
And it's not just about data and knowledge, which
yeah,
again the AIs can do. And I think AIs can help guide us. They can do testing. They can suggest pathways. They can do lesson plans. They can do performance stuff. And so AIs, because it is very individualistic, AIs can help a human teacher manage, a bunch of students all at once, trying to help them go get on their own path. So
yeah,
I'm also aware of how conservative and how hard it is to reform an education system. So I think it take 25 years for this to happen. I'm not in any under any illusion that this happens quickly. It'll
yeah,
happen very, very, very slowly. However, I think we're already seeing a bypassing. Most Americans kids have learned more from YouTube than they will ever learn at school, and
yeah,
so um, maybe a lot of this happens outside of school, which is fun.
right. Indeed. Indeed. My own son, like his most learning is done on
Right,
Wikipedia.
right.
Reads massively and it's unlimited.
Well, here's the question: but is he editing Wikipedia? Is he does he actually edit?
Not yet. Maybe it should be next step.
That is the real step. So I have a friend, George Church, very, very famous,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
guy. He carries around, he has a laptop version of Wikipedia, and Wikipedia is his notebook. Whenever he learns something,
Here we go,
he
edit.
goes into Wikipedia and add it if it's not in Wikipedia.
Wow.
So so that had your son has that in front of them,
Okay,
becoming
I'll
one of the
pass that
major
on to
editors
him.
of Wikipedia.
Indeed. Yeah. And I think that the second part of education you mentioned in the book is also fascinating about higher education, right? So you talk about, I mean, especially among Chinese parents, I think American parents too, there's such a so much fame around, named schools, right? It's like certain Ivy League schools and
Brand, I call them brand schools.
brand
Yes.
schools. I like that
Right,
word.
right, right.
Okay. And then people all want to go there, and there's so much anxiety. Of course, it's not only to the knowledge you learn, because that means a
Yeah,
social status or
yeah, yeah.
leapfrog or whatever. And I think you did say pretty sharply in the book, you said people go to university now for three things. You go to learn,
Yeah.
you go for the fame or the brand
Uh-huh.
effect of the school, and you go for the social network, right? So
Right.
your social circle. And you do see a vision, I think it's very interesting, see all three of them being somehow replaced. Yeah, can you elaborate a bit more on the higher education angle of the future?
Well, yeah, the brand thing's not going to be replaced, really. I mean, I mean, there could be some new brands. Uh,
Right.
that's just a kind of inherent human tendency, behavior to seek status. And so, but I certainly could see some new brands arising. I mean, some of those institutions have been around a long time, but there could be um, ways of certification or branding your circle, whatever. So while those brands can be replaced, I don't think branding status is going to be eliminated ever. I just want to be clear about that.
Hmm.
Um, so the knowledge, yes, um, higher education, again, it's so complicated because there's a lot happening there. Um, there is the research component of some of the elite schools, which we know about, where it's not just the students learning, as the students actually become part of the process of researching and the forward creation of knowledge. And there is right now a kind of a rethinking about, well, who, how can we do that kind of research better than say the way universities are? And so
Yeah.
there's now some attempts, experiments to have it done with nonprofits, to have it done with corporations and their kind of little research groups, ways to accelerate that. And I think AI can play a huge role in the alternatives to having the research be done at a university.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so again, it's not going to go away in 25 years, but we could have the beginnings of other kinds of institutions that are set up to do the research, which is a component of what universities were supposed to be doing, but often aren't doing very well in terms of, like, say, the pure research, the
Mm-hmm.
long-term, 100-year program that you might need. And so, so there have been recently a number of institutions, often funded by people of wealth, trying to get around that issue and accelerate the scientific method. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a role for AI in helping people discern what they should be funding, where the money should be going, that kind of allocation.
Mm.
So I think we're at a moment where we can kind of imagine an alternative system arising that is partly by AI, but also just partly in terms of new funding models that
Mm-hmm.
tries to address the issue of how do you do basic research that is inherently not immediately profitable. So you're taking a long-term view. That's really tough. Governments should be doing that. Governments are allergic to failure, which makes it hard to do. And so I think we're seeing, again, this is not just AI, but I think we're seeing a bunch of things economically driven to make alternative ways to do the research, which is one of the reasons why people would go to university. So they
Yeah.
wouldn't go there for that.
Yeah, yeah. You also mentioned in the book the possibility of universities or college founded by companies.
Right.
Like companies will come out and found basically college equivalents, and also the type of college that guarantees employment. I think that's very interesting. Can you say a bit more on that? Because I think right now, we have this concept of okay, we go to school and we get a work, get job, right? And then
Right.
that's it. And then oftentimes there is certain tie, but especially now, I think that
Yeah.
tie is broken, right? People say, oh, I can get my
Right.
degree, but I don't know where the
Right.
job is.
Yeah.
Um,
So my son actually he learned programming at a school. It's called a boot camp that was mostly financed by corporations looking for programmers. So when you graduate, they basically guarantee you a job
mhm.
somewhere. Um, and so, this is sort of like an advanced degree, you might call it, being funded like a corporation
Yeah.
to say, okay, we're training you, and it's like what the old unions would do in some ways, where you have apprenticeship, and when you graduated, you were guaranteed a job. So it's not really that new, but it's moving into kind of this intellectual space. And then I also know about an elementary school run by some software developers, and it's in Austin, Texas, and they guarantee your students' performance or your money back.
Mm,
They'll say, we're tested when you come in or whatever, and if the student hasn't improved by this much, we'll give your money back.
mm,
Okay, it was like, whoa, all right. Okay, so they have lots of performance metrics, so they're very performance driven because the students work on keyboards the entire time, so they can measure everything, and they're making a money back guarantee not just university level. This is like in elementary, primary school. So you could think of that as sort of a company attitude. So I think I think that we're at the point we can have alternative models of rather than just sort of a publicly funded generic school system. You have lots of alternatives, including we hopefully still have that um, public version. But corporations and nonprofits, I think there's lots of creative thing happening with different kinds of nonprofits. Like OpenAI is this weird thing. Is it a for-profit nonprofit? I think we're going to see more of that. Um, and again, it's business models, it's funding models that are also there's a frontier for those as well.
Yeah, thank you. I know we're at time. I think at last I found one of the things. When you in the beginning you mentioned you're working on something with 100 years. Do you mind just probably giving a little bit privilege to our listeners so far? What are some of the things you are thinking that will be different in 100 years that's not in the book, so people can look forward to for future books coming out?
Um, that are not different. I think um, medically, uh, some of the promise that we had of the human genome being sequenced and stuff will finally be paying off at that time. So I think we should be able to have vaccines against all cancers by that time, by 100 years. Um, I don't buy into kind of the idea that we're going to be immortal and never die, but I do think that we would have extended our lifespan to like say 120 years by 100 years, at least for some people. I mean, it would be more common. And what else? Um, I think we would probably have supersonic aircraft again in 100 years, where you could fly between U.S. and China in a couple hours. 3 hours. I think they're talking about. That would be great. Or Japan, and I think that we would also have a lot of really fantastic deathless meat, not just kind of the common animals, but super meats, meaning that meat that was better and tasted better was better for you than the meat that we have today, um, which is the natural meat. And so I think that would be really fantastic.
Do you think human governance would change?
You know, slowly, um, I'm a world government fan, but I don't think we would have world government even in 100 years. I think we might have more global institutions. I think it slowly accumulate them. Um, but I don't think we're going to have world government. We could have some additional world governance in place in 100 years. I think that's a very very slow process. It'll take a long time for sovereign nations to surrender their sovereignty. The
Mm.
U.S. being one of the last to ever do that, and so yeah, that's going to be a long process. But I do think we could have again what I would like to have is a public AI. I would like to have public
Mm.
intelligence. I would like to have a AI commons. I would like to have something like the internet for AI,
Mm.
and that would help a global governance. Is you have something federated intelligence system
Mhm.
again that would require a lot of collaboration to make it work.
Mhm.
And so I think public intelligence would be one thing that I think we could have in 100 years. Public
Mm.
intelligence meaning that it's not owned by anybody. It's like the internet. Who owns the internet? Well, who knows? There's a lot of people involved. It's publicly accessible. Anybody can join.
Yeah.
That's what I would like to have in 100 years.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a kind of media in the next generation because media in a
Yeah,
way might function as a public
right,
intelligence
right,
now
right.
for us.
Yeah,
And yeah.
right. I mean,
Well,
in the goodness of time,
yep.
not 100 years, I would like to have what I call the human right of mobility, meaning that anybody born on the planet would have a right to live anywhere on the planet they wanted to if they followed local laws and paid taxes. And that might come about because of the population implosion that we're beginning right now. And so, as the number of people, including especially in China, decreases, there'll be great competition for people. And America is going to be, we're going to be crying for the Mexicans to come back. Come back, please. No, I'm not joking. Just in 20, probably in 25 years, they'll be like, please come to our country. Um, and worldwide, there'll be much more competition in 100 years for sure. The population in 100 years will be half of what it is today in the world.
Hmm.
We'll have
I-
half as many people.
Well, and then the youngest continent is Africa. I
Yeah,
think that's
yeah,
the other
yeah,
thing that
yeah,
shocked me earlier, saying I think over the next 100 years, 75% of population increase or growth is coming from
yeah.
Africa,
But even Africa is put on the
not
right
compensating.
for they're not reproducing, and so
Mm.
so this is worldwide, and so that environment might make the mobility, open borders much more possible
Yeah.
as something to think about.
Yeah. Sometimes I think just the last thought is we can't, I mean, the average age of human being will be so much older. So
Right,
we'll be an older race,
right.
so to speak. And then in the past, at least, our kind of conventional thought is that the older one becomes, the more conservative one becomes, right? So
Hmm.
like the younger generation are the more, innovative, passionate ones.
Right.
Sometimes I ponder what would that mean, a demography change, um, for us as a race? Like if our average age, increase
Right,
from
right, right, right.
35, to 70.
Yeah, no,
Um,
it's a very serious thing. The peak youth on the planet was in 1972. And
mm,
since 1972, the average age on the planet has been increasing. And
mm.
so, yes, that's a very serious issue. If you have old geezers, life extended, and very few young people, unless you can teach the AIs to behave like young people, maybe
Yeah. It would be an interesting world. See, it's the dichotomy, right? So like
right,
it's
right, right.
anyway, well, thank you so much for your time. Of course, for all doing all this work, through your lifetime. And thank you for bringing this book, especially for the audience in China. A lot of reference to China in throughout this book, and then I think every reader will find it very relevant. Again, grab a copy of the book from the link below. And thank you so much again, Kevin, for everything you do and for this book and for this conversation particularly.
It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed it. I love your spirit. Thank you for asking some great questions. Obviously, you're not a robot, so
Let me unplug myself.
yes. All
Well,
right.
perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, yeah.
Thank
Sorry,
you as
I know we
well.
run a bit over time, and thank you for your generosity with your time, and have a great
All right.
rest of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bye bye.
Okay, bye.